the joke Nazi party play in 2023? This feels like a more pedestrian time that this film came out in 2014, 2 years before 2016. Not that anything happened in 2016 that would make anyone in this podcast episode say anything about Nazis, but let's just say something in 2016 did happen. This joke doesn't play at all anymore.
It definitely plays differently because I was like, what? What did they just say?
Oh, they're saying Nazi. They're saying it tongue-in-cheek, though.
Right, and it's a different joke than some 9 years ago than it is now. And you have to remember that kind of stuff. And
some 9 years ago, he says. Holy shit, man. Yeah, on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Dashu, much to the chagrin of many. And I am joined by my good friend, all the way from Wake Up Heavy, Recollections of Horror. He's your friend and mine. He also hosts another show called Cambridge and Washawn on the Weirding Way Media Network, which you should totally check out, because if you're into pop culture, toys, and weird shit from the 80s, this man is going to be your Sherpa up the mountain of 80s pop culture. He's your friend and mine, Mark Begley.
I don't want to die in Canada.
I was hoping that was going to be the one that you said. I really was. Another great line from this movie is "Man truly a walrus at heart" is the line that always cracks me up, because it's a question no one's been asking in the history of man, but I guess Michael Parks has been.
Howard Howe, aka what's the other name? Bartholomew
Moussier. Oh my God. So on this episode of the Culture Cast, we're going to be taking a look at, well, it's a movie that we actually covered almost 10 years ago. We covered this film December 8th, 2014. Mr. Begley, the last time Tusk was covered on this show was 8 episodes in. It was the 8th episode. We're at 500. Yeah, we're at 572 now. If I can offer up some information, don't go and search that episode out. Not because it's embarrassing, but would you want to listen to the 8th thing you did after doing something for a decade? No. So that's why we're here. We're going to be talking about a little movie from 2014 that, well, supposedly, maybe Kevin Smith says it's coming, and we'll see. We talked about it on our Red State episode, which you can find over at weirdingwaymedia.com. We're going to be talking about 2014's man-walrus movie, Tusk.
Always do sober what you do drunk. That'll teach you to keep your mouth shut.
Hemingway said that.
Yes, he did. And he said it to me.
I don't want you to go to Canada tomorrow.
It's for the podcast. It's what I do. I travel around and I interview weird or interesting people.
So look out, you crazy Canucks! Wandering Wallace takes a raunchy road trip up to the Great White North.
Hello, I'm an old man who has enjoyed a long and storied life at sea. And after eons of oceanic adventure, I know I do not wish to spend my remaining years alone when I have such stories to share.
How far is Bifrost from here?
It's about 2 hours from here.
It's about 2 hours away.
I hate American guys.
Good evening.
It's nice to meet you.
Could I interest you in some tea?
So what happened after the boat sank?
I was alone, and then something very swift and frightening moved by me.
A walrus saved your life?
The walrus is far more evolved than any man I've heard of. Present company included.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you? Would you?
There. It'll be all right, Mr. Tusk.
He hasn't called me in 3 days. I'm worried.
Why are you doing this?
Are you really mourning your humanity? I don't understand. Who in the hell would want to be human?
I'm so This guy wants to turn me into an animal or something. I don't want to die in Canada.
So it's written and directed by Kevin Smith, and this is my favorite thing to say, based on a podcast episode, which is such a crock of shit.
And based on actual events too. Quote, quote, quote.
Right.
Unquote.
Well, and we'll get to the actual inspiration for what this is, but the film stars Michael Parks, Justin Long, Haley Joel Osment, who 2 times now. The only other time I talked about him was with you. So,
oh yeah,
and Genesis Rodriguez as well. And there's another person in this movie, but we'll leave
we'll
that.
Get to that.
We'll just like the movie, we'll get to it when we get to it, and it may derail this podcast, possibly like it derails the movie.
You know, I realized thinking about the first time, this is only the second time I've watched this film. So the first time I saw it in the theaters with my friend Ronnie, who is the co-host of Cambridge and with Sean that you mentioned earlier. And we would get together and watch movies on Friday afternoons. And every once in a while, we would actually go and see a movie that we were interested in when it opened. This was one of those things. He had cajoled me into watching Red State, either with him or by myself. I can't remember. Like I mentioned on that episode, it was going to come here to Fresno. Figured might as well go see it. Sounded interesting. Intrigued by the fact that Kevin Smith was going away from the Clerks multiverse, if you want to call it that. I'm not well versed in a lot of.
I believe. Is what he calls it.
Very nice. and
whatever, dude.
When the shots of Justin Long and Haley Joel Osment come up doing their podcast, I was like, you know what? I haven't seen HJO in a movie since Artificial Intelligence. I realized that as I was sitting there watching it. And I was like, oh, it's so nice to see him back in movies. I believe he did a lot of voice work in between. He was in some films. I had to satisfy my curiosity to see if that was even true today. And yeah, it probably was. Since AI, which was 2001, which I also saw in the theater, I don't think I had seen him in anything. And I was really happy to see him. So that was my story about Haley Joel Osment.
So what is Haley Joel Osment and Justin Long doing? Well, they're doing what we're doing. They're podcasters, but they have a podcast with a really, well, in 2023, it's an unfortunate name, the Not See Party. Not Nazis, but not seeing as in they can't see. And they show each other videos from YouTube and laugh at them. And then I guess they go and talk to the people as well. It's kind of a little unclear maybe, but well, good old Justin Long finds a video on the internet where a kid cuts his leg off by accident, and this is all taking place in Manitoba. So wouldn't you know it, he heads on up to Manitoba, Canada, to meet the Kill Bill kid, which is, yes, a more or less thinly veiled ripoff of the Star Wars kid, but obviously kid cuts his leg off with a katana. Star Wars kid's very much still alive, also never had a real lightsaber. And he gets up there and the Star Wars kid, Kill Bill kid, is dead. He goes to a bar and finds a listing on the stall wall for Michael Parks's stories that he has to tell someone, and Justin Long is that person, and he goes to Pippy Hill, Michael Parks' home, for what can only be described as a nightmare of a different pinniped variety, one might say. It's if you're grossed out by body horror, you're probably not the target audience for this movie. But at the same time, I would say if you're grossed out by body horror, you might be the target audience for this movie, because it's a body horror movie in name only. It's a horror movie in name only, even, one might even say. But Begley, before I kind of bury the lead here, you kind of got it out of the way at the top here when you saw this the last time. But I want to know what you thought watching it this time.
Well, I enjoyed it. I can't say I didn't enjoy it the first time I watched it. I was perplexed by it, and I believe Ronnie and I went and had lunch afterward and were like, what the fuck did we just watch?
And that's a valid response to the movie, I think, in general. Like, in general.
Right. I knew the premise. It's sort of hard not to figure it out. And plus, although I wasn't on Twitter at the time, I think everybody knows the premise of this, or his fans at least, know what's going to happen in this movie before they even go see it, because of that episode of his podcast. They tell the whole story. And
it's based off of a real thing. A guy in a Gumtree ad was
real thing, quote unquote, real thing.
Right. A guy on like the British, like Craigslist was looking for someone to come and live with him free of charge if they dressed as a walrus. And Kevin
dressed
Smith,
as a walrus.
Right. And Kevin Smith and Scott Mosier, it's beautiful, man, which is a great
Mosier. That's where that name comes from in the movie.
That's what I figured. In the episode 259 of Smodcast, which 259 in 2014, folks, which
wow.
Yeah, fucking crazy, right? In episode 259 of the Smodcast, aptly titled "The Walrus and the Carpenter," Kevin Smith and Scott Moussier spend the entire episode talking on and on and on and on about this ad, and they essentially, like you've said, write the movie more or less. And then at the end of the movie, it's Tusk yes or Tusk no. Walrus yes, walrus no is what it is. Excuse me.
Hashtag,
walrus, walrus yes, walrus no. And obviously, like we mentioned in the Red State episode, which you should totally listen to before this episode, because we talk a little bit about the Kevin Smith creative process in that episode. Kevin Smith literally makes this movie because of that, because of the Twitter response. Look, he was going to make the movie anyways. I mean, right. Twitter didn't change anything. It more or less just reaffirmed to him that he was making it, but he was making this movie. And you know what? God bless him.
Yeah. So you know the story going in. I knew the basic story, but it zigged when I thought it was going to zag. It played out a lot differently than I imagined in my head. So I was a little, which isn't the movie's fault, but there is a point. So anyway, I enjoyed it much more today. I was like, oh, this is actually really well done. Everybody's really good in this. I'm enjoying the dialogue. Justin Long, after just rewatching Barbarian, he plays this self-entitled white guy prick perfectly. I mean, it's the same character in both movies, basically. He's maybe a little worse in Barbarian. Well, I won't spoil that movie, but he's accused of some awful shit in that.
But this guy's like one step away from being accused of that stuff, right?
Right. Everybody is there. Everybody in the world is there to serve him.
Placate
in both of these films. In both films, that is his character. And he does it really well. And I like him. And I think I mentioned to you, probably off podcast, I used to watch the show Ed. And he was on there, and that's where I first learned about him. And I have enjoyed most things that I have seen, or I have enjoyed him in pretty much everything I've seen him in since that show. And he was great in Ed. But yeah, I enjoyed it way more this time around, up until a certain point when a new character is introduced. And then that I think is what really threw me the first time I watched it. Knew it was coming this time, but it still throws me off. I think it hurts the tone of the film and doesn't completely work, but it doesn't totally derail the film for me. I enjoyed it more this time and really, really liked the first two acts of the film.
So I just want to ask, it would have been better if it had been Benoit Blanc and not Guy Lapointe, huh? Is that what you're saying? Because that's what I think of now when I think of this performance in this movie and something like what Daniel Craig is doing. It's the same level of bullshit. It's a level of bullshit that only certain actors can get away with because the expectation is this is such a complete 180 from who you even base are. Because Johnny Depp is in this movie as a French Canadian, and he is nowhere remotely French Canadian any more than Daniel Craig is remotely Southern. But Benoit Blanc, I guess everybody is okay with it because it's a serious movie with a more serious tone. I agree. Johnny Depp almost sinks this movie, but I don't know. It still kind of works for me, and I can't put my finger on why necessarily. Maybe I give this movie a little bit of a pass. That might be why. But at the same time, I don't think it's annoying. It's strange. It's strange with a capital S.
And I can't even really say it's a shift in tone, although the stuff with the walrus, the stuff between Michael Parks and Justin Long is played straight. There are funny moments, but it's dark. It's dark. And Guy Lapointe is anything but dark. If you can have a weird character with an edge, and there's like no edge to his character. It's a goofiness that isn't really represented in the rest of the film, as far as I'm concerned.
Would it have been better if it hadn't been Johnny Depp? Or is it just the way the character's written?
I think written or improved. From what I've heard, he improvised most of his lines. So I think we can lay the blame mostly on him.
Well, I mean, there's some of it that's clearly not improv. Like, he had to get to certain things. I think I think the things that work are the things that are clearly written things, like him talking about, finding the bodies and stuff, and like going and hunting down a serial killer, like him being a detective, I think is interesting. When he when he's clearly going off script, it's easy to tell because it feels like a fish like this, like out of the water. It feels like it's kind of floundering a little bit. And, on this watch through, it is something that reminded me of a movie that would come out 2 years later, the Paul Feige Ghostbusters movie, where it's like, just because someone is doing something and you think it's funny doesn't mean it's not too much for everybody. And I think, like the Johnny Depp stuff about this movie, like kind of overtakes the movie in a lot of ways. Like the outside visibility of this movie is elevated because Johnny Depp is in it, in a way that Yoga Hosers never got, which is weird because he's like in Yoga Hosers compared to this movie where he's just like there. In Yoga Hosers, he's like a character that shows up and is ever present throughout the entire film, more or less.
Well, and that may not have worked because people were put off by it in this movie. Like, I really want to watch a whole movie about that guy.
Well, honestly, he works better in Yoga. He works better in Yoga Hosers because that movie's tone is weird and like that. Okay, that movie's actually that movie has some problems, but I would actually say Yoga Hosers ain't that bad. It has some great actors in it, including Austin Butler in a very like interesting performance that in a lot of ways the movie doesn't deserve. But for me, like the whole Johnny Depp thing in this movie works better in the other movie, but that's because that movie's tone is more like, this movie's tone is so dark outside of right. Like, but it's weird because it doesn't necessarily need to be. And I feel like it's never earned. Like, it's trying to earn a dark tone that it never really like lands, I guess, is even a better way of putting it.
Well, I think all of this stuff in the house is dark and works really well. And that, I think, is what I enjoyed even more this time. The interaction between Justin Long and Michael Parks plays out really well. And again, you kind of know what's going on. This guy's gone to a stranger's house and is immediately given something to drink. You know that drink is going to be drugged, and it plays out, and of course he's telling these interesting stories that have Justin Long entranced. And I just like how that plays out, and what's going to happen, but it seems to be taking a very long time for this thing that as an audience member, is going to happen. And then it finally starts to happen, but it's not immediate. So we're still, telling stories, and Justin Long is still intrigued. Wallace is his character's name, is still intrigued by him, and really doesn't figure it out until he passes out. I mean, he makes the realization and then he's immediately out. And then it's like, interrupted by a flashback or a memory. But, the very next thing is he's already lost a leg. He's already incapacitated. Shit's already happening to him. And that, I think, surprised me the first time and this time, that, oh shit, it's getting real, like, already. We're a good ways into the movie, but they haven't had much of an interaction yet. And this thing that's going to happen has started. It's
an hour and 40 minutes. It's got a pretty breezy pace. Like, and what's funny is I think, now if this movie were made with 2023 sensibilities, it would be 2.5 hours long. Like, and I'm not saying that to be kind of like dismissive or anything, but in a lot of ways, like, there's a lot more movie here to be told. And I'm not saying that and in like Kevin Smith leaves things on the floor. He kind of opens the world up in some interesting directions and then just kind of like lets you as the audience sit with it. He doesn't explore it. And in Yoga Hosers, he kind of does a little bit kind of backtrack on what's going on in this movie. And it's actually really funny because in Yoga Hosers, Tusk plays into 2 cameos in that movie. One of Jason Mewes, and then Guy Lapointe is in that movie. But they mentioned the walrus. They call him the manatee. He's known as the manatee, not the walrus. And the 2 girls, the Colleens, as they're called in Yoga Hosers, are like, well, it was a walrus. It wasn't even a manatee. They weren't even reporting correctly. And then Guy Lapointe has written a book, and it's about like his like solving of the entire case. But yeah, right. So I mean, it shows back up, but like in this movie, he just has like, I don't know, Kevin Smith crafted a connected universe between his movies before Marvel did. Like, and it's kind of weird to think about that. You mentioned his like universe of movies, but they are connected. I don't think these are connected to anything. They're connected to Yoga Hosers, but I like that in this world,
the Canada trilogy,
right?
That hasn't
yet to be finished,
come to fruition.
Yeah, but I like that in this movie, there's hints at a larger kind of world and other things going on, and you see these kind of flashbacks of it. But I don't know. I think the sensibilities Kevin Smith has as a comedy director suit him well in horror, obviously, and that can't always be said for every comedy director.
Yeah, there seems to be a disparity in the Guy Lapointe character versus the rest of the movie, because even when he's talking, so when I forget Haley Joel Osment's character, Teddy and Allie hook up. Teddy and Allie hook up with him, and they're eating at that restaurant, that little
Gimli
diner,
Sliders, the Gimli
Slider
burger.
Restaurant. Like they're deadly serious. I mean, this is a serious thing that's happening to their friend, although they're sleeping with each other as well, that he's a complete asshole. So I kind of understand that. Their expressions, their responses, their mannerisms, everything about them is deadly serious. And Johnny Depp's just kind of riffing. And it's like, it just doesn't quite work. I don't want to go on about this forever, but that is the one thing in the movie that stands out to me. And I don't mind tonal shifts in films when something goes from dark to ridiculous or things like that. It's just a different kind of goofy. You could call the whole movie goofy, but the stuff with Justin Long and Michael Parks, man, is some dark shit, is some weird, fucked up shit, especially when the layers start becoming revealed that this is ongoing. He has dismembered, cut up, skinned multiple people. You've got faces on the skin that he's applying to Justin Long to turn him into a walrus. There is a decomposing walrus already in the pool that he has for him. You know, it's some fucked up shit.
Like I said, it hints at a bigger world of things having happened. Like it's told through like lines of dialogue. That's it.
He plays into that because he's been hunting this guy and met that. I do like that scene between the two of them.
That scene is actually fun. It's fucking insane. That whatever Michael Parks is doing in that scene is, I think he's supposed to be slow. I think is what he's like.
He's pretending to be a man-child, like Guy Lapointe calls him, you know.
Right. But like it's so convincing. Like you forget that he's this monster for like 2 minutes, but it's also insane to see Johnny Depp and Michael Parks sharing the same space as those two characters.
It is pretty fun. I did appreciate the humor in that scene a lot, but it has a dark edge to it because this guy is killing people, right? And like he says later on, as he comes back out of flashback, the dude that I was looking for was most likely in his house while I was standing right there. Right. So that's a dark thought.
Yeah. Makes me think of A Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I believe the serial killer at the end of that movie says the same thing to the lead character. He's like, when you were in my house, there was like a chick locked up in the basement. Yeah. Like it has that like, and that's the thing, like it's almost like, in a lot of ways, it feels like a satire of these kinds of movies because it's, I'm kidnapping you. And instead of, doing like a Leonard Lake, Charles Ng thing, speaking of Californian serial killers, where they like leave you locked up in a fucking bunker in their backyard, this guy's turning you into a walrus. Like if that premise doesn't make you chuckle, which it should.
It is absurd.
Right. You're not the target audience for this movie is kind of my response. Like if you're watching a movie about a guy turning someone into a walrus thinking this is going to be a serious movie, like I feel like the movie kind of doesn't help itself by trying to be serious. But I also understand that to land a satire correctly, you have to really lean on the conventions of what you're satirizing. And in a lot of ways, like this has the DNA of like Silence of the Lambs in it. You have a guy who's skinning people and using the skin to do something. And then at the end of the movie, it takes place in this basement that's dark and kind of dank. Yeah, there's plenty of parallels to these other movies, but this movie feels like if it had been maybe not Kevin Smith, it would have been more of a satire. But I think Kevin Smith's unique brand of comedy maybe gets in the way. That's the Johnny Depp stuff. Like, it's weird for weird's sake. And you know what? Like, good for you that you lit a grenade and then you dropped it in front of you and it didn't kill you when it blew up. It just blew your legs off. Like, that's what it feels like. Like, you still got away with the movie, but I feel like without the Johnny Depp stuff, more people would totally have enjoyed this movie. And it might not have, quote, divided the fans and critics alike, because there's no way there's no middle ground with this movie. I mean, we were talking with people yesterday about this movie and they were fucking bemoaning this movie's existence, which I, again, as someone who likes it, I totally get it, because there's no middle ground with a movie this bizarre that makes these distinct choices with a capital C.
You know what was weird when I was watching it today, after having watched Red State with Michael Parks as well, and I enjoy him in this more. I like his performance in this more. It's way more understated until he has moments of lunacy, or I don't want to say anger, but he goes up to that level that he's almost constantly in Red State. But as I was watching it, when he was telling the stories, the Hemingway story and his life as an orphan, that whole, again, based on actual events, these things happened in Canada, apparently back in the 30s or something, I think, or maybe earlier. Anyway, I'm like, who is he reminding me of? Who am I seeing in this role other than him right now? And it was related to Red State. I could see Stephen Root playing this character. And then when he did the scene with Johnny Depp on his porch where they both have these ridiculous voices, I'm like, that's like a Stephen Root bit, that voice that he's doing. And I was like,
it's Milton from fucking Office Space.
Yeah, I'm like, that could have been interesting, because he plays that, and he's not in it very much, but he has that dark turn in Get Out, where he's a very calm, the way he talks, his mannerisms, his voice. And it's like, oh, I wonder if I'm sure this was for Michael Parks specifically.
Kevin Smith more or less says so. He's like, I just wanted to hear him read like the sailor stories. Like, all right. Like, and
I know that he says that he wouldn't have made it if he didn't take the part, but I'm thinking, man, if he couldn't do it, it would have been interesting if he thought, you know what, maybe Stephen Root could do this for me, because I think he could have. I really heard that and saw that in Michael Parks' performance. It's like Stephen Root could have done this.
Yeah, I like that Michael Parks has that like I don't know, Stephen Root for me has never had welcoming energy, but Michael Parks kind of does. The Howard Howe in the chair does. It's not as malicious, obviously. I mean, the moment Wallace realizes the jig is up when his leg is gone is when Michael Parks like lets the facade more or less start to kind of drip and fade. And I mean, those, show me how the fishy swims. Like, Jesus, that shit's terrifying. Like, he's terrifying in this movie. He really is. Like, and like you said about Red State, in Red State, it's like dialed up to 11, and then they just tear the knob off and throw it away. Like, he's never going to get an opportunity to go down. In this movie, there's a little, I mean, at the beginning,
it's much more understated. Much more understated.
Towards the end, though, it kind of goes off the rails, but that's okay. I mean, when he's in a walrus suit fighting Justin Long, like,
but he's not over the top raised voice the whole time.
Right.
It's more,
he's not yelling in our hero's face at the end of the movie.
It's when you hear somebody say crazy shit, but they're saying it in a calm voice,
right,
that you really get scared. Someone yelling at you is a different kind of fear, but it's like if someone's relaying a story and then it gets really dark and their tone hasn't changed, that's when you know you're in trouble. And I love that moment when he stands up at the table when Justin Long is refusing to eat and screaming and stuff, and then he gets up and he's like, oh shit, even that was a facade. Now I know I'm fucked because this guy can walk. I've got no recourse now. I'm one-legged and I'm doped up to, the state of being incapacitated, and this fucker can walk.
I also really love how he's maliciously polishing that goddamn bone in that scene, the scene where he wakes up for the first time. And again, I mean, I don't know. Did you realize what was going on in that scene when you watched it the first time? That he's polishing the dude's leg bone?
Oh, no. I just thought it was a tusk.
Yeah. So he's like polishing the leg bone of his like that he cut off.
I get you. Yeah.
Which is like fucking horrible. Like, again, like it's those little touches in this movie that, like, I don't know. And the scene where it's the shot of Michael Parks and he's working on Justin Long on the table and you don't see Justin Long until the very end of the scene is so well done. Like, wait, like Kevin Smith did that scene. Like that's a scene straight out of a horror playbook. In a way that like it works so well that the reveal is earned. And you know what? The reveal's not as gross as it could have been. The reveal isn't as gross as it will be because they need you to be primed and ready for the reveal, which I think ends up working, even though it does look...
It's not great. It's not great.
The first time I saw this movie, I loved it so much. And now when I watch it, it's like, it makes me laugh more than anything else. It's so funny looking, and like the logistics of it make zero sense.
Well, and I think just the material itself isn't really all that convincing as skin. I know that he wanted Nicotero to do this, Greg Nicotero, and Nicotero couldn't because of Walking Dead. So Kurtzman did it, who of course was Nicotero's old partner. I think if Nicotero had been able to do the skin, it would have been a lot more convincing. It looks very rubbery and latexy and
looks like a Halloween costume that I own. It's like a Halloween mask that I own that's supposed to be like a serial killer mask, but it's like just like a piece of like a mask that's supposed to look like a human face that's been cut off. It looks just like it. It looks so cheap. And like the thing with Johnny Depp in this movie is one thing, but the walrus suit looks so hinky. And that for me was not a complaint that I had because, I didn't really mention at the top, my history with the movie other than the fact that I've done an episode on it before. But I really like this movie, and I've watched this movie plenty of times since this time for this episode, including when we talked about it in 2014. And I liked it a lot in 2014. I wasn't a stoner then like I am now. And the older I've gotten and the more of a kind of free spirit I've become, I enjoy this movie a lot more because I think it's stupider than it really presents itself. It's just so dumb. Like the idea is just so moronic that only someone who's smoking grass could have come up with it. Like to go like, oh, this will be a funny movie. And it is. It's made for Kevin Smith's ha-ha audience that laugh at the stupid shit he comes up with. And in a lot of ways, I like laughing at this kind of stuff that he comes up with a lot more than I do his more conventional stuff now. Like, I like how just weird and madcap and bizarre and off the wall this is. Because again, like this is Red State. But Red State was like pitch black. This movie is one shade up from that. Because like Red State, I would say is not very funny. But you could make the case that it's humorous, but it's really poking fun at two things. This movie's just kind of, again, fucking weird, but a black comedy because it's a body horror movie. Like, and Human Centipede is a black comedy too, in a lot of ways. But Human Centipede's actually gross. Like this movie is just, if you look at Justin Long in the suit and you think anything other than this is just a weird thing that I'm looking at, not like, oh, this is so terrible, because again, like it would, if the effects had been done by someone with a defter touch, I feel like that would have been the case. But I just feel like, oh, this is such a weird thing I'm looking at. It's one of the strangest pieces of practical effect I've ever seen. It's unique. Even if it doesn't look convincing, you've never seen anything like it. And that's a double of this movie. Johnny Depp being a weirdo is one thing, but the second kind of knock against this movie or elevatory piece is the weirdness of what you end up getting when Justin Long is revealed in the walrus costume.
Yeah, it's not great. I don't know, though, if maybe that's on purpose to keep it less dark than if it had been very realistic skin.
Then they show the
texture.
walrus in the water that's dead and it's like a skeleton and shit. Like they are amping up the stakes, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you mentioned body horror and black humor, dark comedy, black comedy. And I think that's one thing that gets missed a lot when people talk about David Cronenberg, the king of body horror, the king of venereal horror, as I like to say, since the early films are, sex and death and transformation all wrapped together.
Crimes of the future.
Those fucking movies are funny. Shivers, Rabid, Scanners, maybe not as much, but there is a very, very dry, dark humor running through those films. And it's not easy to pick up on because just in general, his films, especially the early ones, and he gets accused of this a lot, devoid of emotion, very cold films. But when I did that episode on Shivers, I was like, shit, man, this movie is fucking hysterical. If you listen to things a little bit differently, if you listen to a lot of these lines that people are saying, I think this is supposed to be funny, at least to David Cronenberg, if no one else. And so that idea of this, it is ridiculous to want to turn somebody into a walrus. The reason that he wants to turn somebody into a walrus is ridiculous, but it's told straight, which I really love. I love the idea of why. I mean, he fell in love with a walrus, basically.
He's bloviating.
A male walrus.
Yeah, he's bloviating. Like, in all those scenes, he's just like going on and on and on. It's like, you fell in love with a walrus. Like,
because you were stranded on an island with it and probably fucked its blubber and shit. I mean, come on, just own up to the real story here, guy.
Yeah, like that for me is like
blubber back,
right? Like that's what cracks me up. And in a lot of ways, it's like a weird. I don't know if that's like a musing on it, but another kind of connection now that again we're in a post 2022 world. This also could be Dahmer adjacent because again, like there's a weird homosexuality thing going through the movie because the duplicitous orphan thing was about children that were being raped by the clergy. So like, and yeah, like he wants to make his lover again. And at one point in the movie, and I don't know if you picked up on this, and it always makes me wonder, there's a scene where he pushes his head underwater and it's in such a position where it looks like he's giving him head.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
So yeah, and I believe it's so far between viewings of this movie for me, and I'm having these memories of that first time I watched it. So during that scene, I'm thinking, oh, I believe I thought that that's what was going on the first time I watched it, but it's really ambiguous here. Is he's toughening him up, or that's what he's saying he's doing, like getting him into fighting shape, or teaching him, you've got to be a walrus, so you've got to be able to swim underwater and stuff. But then they show him and he's buck naked when he gets out of the pool. He's putting his towel on and he was like, oh, he was naked while he was doing this. Well, okay, well, that's a different fucking story then. So that's why I thought that the first time I saw it, and why I'm remembering that I thought that the first time I saw it, because the dude was completely naked in the pool and shoving his head down into his crotch.
Okay, so you picked up on it too, still, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's there, but was that what was going on or not? You don't know.
Again, like that, and that's the thing. Like Kevin Smith leaves enough open for you as an audience member,
which is kind of surprising to me for him, because I don't see him as a subtle filmmaker, and maybe that's just my own. And I believe I brought that up in the Red State episode. I don't see him trading in subtlety a lot, and maybe that's just my own misreading of his work. Although, again, I haven't seen most of his filmography. Oh, I wanted to go back to the point about him polishing his leg bone, because I didn't pick up on it, and I still didn't pick up on it when the Guy Lapointe character is saying, we found the hockey player eventually, and he had holes in his face and no one could explain it. And then within that, we found a little piece of his leg bone.
Yeah.
So that should have clued me in again, like, oh, that's what I'm watching that, listening to what he's saying and going, oh, he's getting his tusk ready. That's all I thought of. But that makes perfect sense.
I mean, it doesn't help that it's being delivered by one of cinema's strangest characters. So, I mean, again, like I think that's the other problem with that Johnny Depp scene, to have circled back to this, but I think this is important. And this is maybe the biggest point of all. Because it's Johnny Depp, you can't stop focusing on the fact that it's Johnny fucking Depp. And that gets in the way of that scene being good any way you cut it. Because it's Johnny Depp. And like, this is 2014. That's the problem here. And like, that's the other problem now with this movie. Post last year, where it was like, all we heard about was I stepped on a bee, and that weird Amber Heard Johnny Depp nonsense that felt like it went on for an entire year. Mm-hmm. We're in a post all of that universe. In 2014, Johnny Depp was like the shit. In 2014, he had just come off of having, one of the biggest franchises in the world, Pirates of the Caribbean. And then he also was in another one with that, the Fantastic Beast was right on the horizon. He was right in the middle of a weird spot in his career. And so, before this year, he does Lone Ranger, then he does Tusk. The year after this, he's nominated for an Oscar for playing Whitey Bulger in Black Mass. Like, that's the other thing. Like, Johnny Depp, I think, is a distraction in more ways than one. And it distracts from being able to appreciate the writing that Kevin Smith has done to build out the world that his movie is taking place in. Because, again, like, it would be like if in Red State, I'm trying to think of like if in Red State, if that reveal were to happen in the chapel, because you could do that in Red State. That's like 30, 40 minutes into the movie, like in Tusk, where there's this reveal of there's somebody in this movie that you don't know. If that had happened in Red State and they had pulled back the cloth and they're in the chapel where Michael Parks is speaking, but it had been, I don't fucking know, some other big, like fucking George Clooney or Brad Pitt or somebody, it would have gotten in the way there too, where you're just like, that's Brad Pitt or George Clooney. And like, that's the problem here. I don't think regardless of what Johnny Depp is doing in this movie, it's kind of hard to divorce the fact that it's Johnny Depp, 2014 Johnny Depp, who's still a big deal Johnny Depp.
I kind of think we're not supposed to realize it's Johnny Depp, though.
Okay.
I mean, seriously, I remember like, oh, you're going to be so surprised by this cameo. It's like the Tom Cruise thing at the end of Tropic Thunder. Or not at the end. I mean, he's in it throughout, but like that.
This is the closest comparison, actually, by the way. Good point.
That makeup makes him look unrecognizable in Tropic Thunder. You still get the voice, or, and most likely for me, I didn't see it in the theater, so I had an inkling that there's a big name star in this, and it was pretty easy to tell who it was and what character they were playing. The same could be said for this, but I honestly think the point is you're not supposed to really recognize that it's Johnny Depp. Now, I'm not saying they pulled it off.
Oh, I know you're not. No,
he's not credited in the movie. He's Guy Lapont playing Guy Lapont.
I know. Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's not completely obvious it's him. And anybody who saw the movie 2 seconds after it opened would have had it spoiled for them. Oh, John, guess what? Johnny Depp's in this, the goofy character. No one's going into this. Again, I'm sure there are people who went in and had no idea it was him.
Well, on the previous episode we did, I had a genuine reaction revealing that Johnny Depp was in this movie. For real.
What do you mean?
Like we were talking about it. I was like, did you realize that Johnny Depp was in this movie? Oh. And they were like, what? Where? And I was like, Guy Lapointe. And they were like, no fucking way. I re-listened to the episode just so I could remind myself. But yeah.
See, so not everybody's
right. That feels insane to me. But again, like that's, trying to remove the hindsight that we now have.
Right.
But I did want to mention the other thing about Michael Parks and Justin Long and the walrus suit thing of this movie. Logistically, the walrus suit has still does not make any sense to me, because when Michael Parks gets in it and then he busts out of it, how is Justin Long in it? Is there stuff around him keeping that feels like a problem of the design by Kurtzman, not by Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith approves the design. I'm assuming, again, Kevin Smith is an auteur in a lot of ways. He gets what he wants and he knows what he wants, but Like it's like if I were making a walrus suit, this is not what it would look like. It would look much more grotesque than this, to the point where like you're like queasy as an audience member because I want you to understand how fucking disgusting this person truly is.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big problems I had with it the first time was the actual design of the suit and the creature, if we can call him that. I don't know if you want to dig into the ending just yet, but I have a real big issue with the ending of this. That
please say logistically. That's all I want you to say.
Yeah, that relates to the whole idea of the film. And if you stay through the credits, you hear this portion of that podcast that the movie ends up, being based on. You hear he and his podcast partner basically outlining the third act of the film in pretty basic detail, but I have a big issue with, and I had it in my head that this actually happened. I must have had an issue with it back then as well and decided to change it in my head, change the end of the movie in my head. But there is absolutely no way that skin would still be on him a year later.
I know.
There's no way.
It's so fucking stupid. And like,
there's no way it would have lasted even in the amount of time that he was in the house.
Right.
It would have been rotting off already.
Right.
And it would have
been in the water that whole time. It
would have completely rotted off. So that makes me think, it's obviously skin from other people. It is not his skin. He is, like you said, in there somehow. All of that dead flesh would have rotted off, probably would have given him horrible sepsis and died. But here's my issue with the end of the film. And I understand their explanation of it within that podcast episode where he has gone full walrus. So that explains their ending of the movie. He's gone full walrus, which makes sense. He's been through this really traumatic experience. He has fought to the death as a walrus. There's no going back. His legs aren't going to get put back on. His tongue is not going to get put back in. But I'm pretty sure that they would have, since they were there pretty quickly, they rescued him fairly quickly. He would have been taken to a hospital. All that other flesh would have been removed. They probably could have removed the stitches and freed his arms to a certain extent, where he would have a life outside of being in a walrus suit. Not to say that the idea that they have of him being in an institution and being full walrus doesn't completely work for the film. I think it's just too realistic to have them, instead of going to visit him in a quote unquote zoo for exotic animals, that they're visiting him in an institution and he thinks he is a walrus and his body is still horribly disfigured from this. He's going to have holes in his face from the tusks, where the tusks were, scars everywhere, no legs, disabled arms to some extent. And you can still have that sad ending where they throw him the fucking fish and he eats it off the ground, but he's not in a stupid looking, dumbass, unrealistic. There's no way it could still be hanging on him walrus suit. That's my issue with the end of the film. And I think that would have been a much rougher ending than what we got.
I laugh at the ending of this movie because, as someone who enjoys altered states of mind, and the film's fine, but altered states, you somebody's smoking a fat joint and going, what's the funniest way to end this movie? Oh, they throw him a fish and he's in a zoo. Like, that's it. I mean,
which is basically what they do in that podcast.
Right.
And I'm like, it's not even that funny though.
Right. Like,
because you're not going for funny anymore.
Right. But and that's again, like, that's the tonal inconsistency of the movie rearing its ugly head once again. Because as far as I'm concerned, the ending is equal parts funny and fucked up because these people have resigned their friend to this zoo. They care so little for, like, my interpretation of the ending is they care so little for their friend that they did essentially nothing to prevent him being in this zoo. And they've essentially allowed him to be there because he's a piece of shit anyways.
Right.
And like Genesis Rodriguez feels bad, but she's also clearly still with Haley Joel Osment. So like, I don't like, that's like the ending. I think the ending works on two levels. I think the ending works like at face value. I get it though. Like realistically, it doesn't work because none of like, again, you really got to suspend disbelief with the walrus suit because of the design. I've always asked, like, is he
the skin's in the same shape as it was a year earlier. The skin is in the same shape. There is no fucking possible way.
Is he in blubber in the suit? Is he in like a contraption in the suit that bulks him out? Because the suit's huge. Like it's just legit. Like when I'm asking questions like that, you're unable to capture my attention and pull me away from asking fucking questions that
how does the suit
in
work?
and of themselves are fucking stupid. Right. But like it's a stupid question to ask, how does the walrus suit work in a movie? Because like the fuck does it really matter? But at the same time, it does, because in a reality that you're crafting, you want to hew close to something that we can all agree is a relatable reality of how the human body works. Because we're ultimately in a body horror movie, the payoff is we're thinking about ourselves being in that position and how terrible that would be. And I can't understand what the suit even is like if I were to be stuck in that suit, because I can't physically understand the design because it's not well done. The way to do this design, I think, if you really want to get fucking disgusting, is you like break and fuse the legs together, and then you essentially like just like, I don't know, like cut the arms off and reattach them or something. And then the thing with the tibia is fucking great. That is inspired. That's the most inspired thing in this entire movie, is taking someone's leg bones and polishing them down and turning them into tusks. That's fucking great. That really is great.
I think I agree, because it bothers me too. And it could be a couple throwaway line from Michael Parks. Like he explains so much as it is.
Right.
It wouldn't be uncharacteristic for him to say, oh, and the blubber will keep you warm in the cold water that surrounds your body. Whatever. But I do agree with the leg thing. And I think that's part of the problem that I had when I first saw it. Like, that's the different path would be to construct this a different way. And they show, and Johnny Depp even does the example of the flipper arms, which
crucified
he has.
T-Rex.
But he's not sewn up that way. He's sewn up with his arms down along his body. His hands would be near his waist. That's not how they show him sewn up by Michael Parks. His hands are not up at his shoulders.
Right. Which
sewn
is
together,
he'd be like this.
Sewn together here or sewn together here.
Right.
He's sewn together
like on his side,
along
like
his ribs.
The sides of his arms.
It's not done the way that he's presented in the film.
Right.
So, I don't want to go all cinema sins like I joke, but the world that you're creating needs to have some continuity, and you're showing me one thing and telling me another. And I remember what you showed me because it's a pretty horrible scene. Both of his legs are gone now. You've stitched an extra piece of skin, it looks like, to his chest and his arm, but his arm isn't up like that. I'm very certain that his arm is not up in that position. That would, when yes, you're laying on your stomach, then your arms would be up here, shoulder height, which is how he's presented as a walrus. It's not done that way though. So yeah, I think that the ending that I imagine in my head would have been a lot rougher and more emotional. And we can't go there in this movie that's kind of supposed to be goofy, that comes in with the end credit scene of Guy Lapointe talking about eating too many sliders. So they almost get there though, because they mention institution in that they don't talk about. So obviously this was changed from the podcast idea to the movie. They talk about them going, and I think it's just Teddy and not the girlfriend, talk about him going and visiting him in an institution, but he has gone full walrus. And I think that idea would have worked better with him having been repaired physically as much as possible, but his fucking mind is gone because of this experience.
Like that in the to me is tapes.
That's a much harder, rougher ending than what we get, and more emotional even than what we get. And it is, like you said, it is pretty emotional. And he finally cries, which she had never seen him do. I mean, if you're not trying to pull out emotion with that whole bit, then why have the flashback to her talking about that? in the middle of this.
Right. I mean, it like stalls the ending out. You think the movie's about to end and then it goes on for like another 2 or 3 minutes just to get this point across of like who the character of Wallace is. I think Justin Long is obviously the best part of this movie other than Michael Parks. I think they're kind of 1A and 1B. They're both so good. And again, like you mentioned with something like Barbarian, you know, my point of entry with Justin Long is Galaxy Quest, first movie that he was in, 99. And like, he's so lovable and kind of like nerdy lovable in that movie. And then like, I just equate him with that kind of character, like in Accepted and Jeepers Creepers. And like, that's just the characters that he plays. And yeah, like this is such a weird turn for him that would then get echoed almost a decade later with something like Barbarian. But this was like the first time I had seen him being this like kind of self-aggrandizing dickhead. But it works. Like he really pulls it off. Really and I also think that the mustache helps. For whatever reason, he looks like such a big dickhead with that mustache. I don't know what it is. Like something about that mustache just makes him even more feel like a prick. Like
it is inspired.
Yeah. I
saw somebody, or it might have been on the IMDb trivia, and this is just idiotic, but to relate back to the whole Nazi thing. And, you know, they mention they always have to correct people or explain what they mean by Nazi. But he does, you know, the German accent and stuff. And he mentions Hitler and puts his fingers up to show that kind of the Hitler mustache. And so some idiot on the IMDb trivia put, you know, Hitler had a mustache like that, but Justin Long's is shaved in that area. I'm like, it's not shaved. It's just where his fucking cleft is. Your hair doesn't grow there for some people. It's not shaved down the middle to be like an inverted Hitler mustache. You fucking idiot.
Let's start our prog rock band, me and you, Mark. We'll call it Inverted Hitler.
Inverted Hitler mustache.
God.
And shave this part here.
No, they gave him a mustache because he's a fucking walrus, and walruses have mustaches. That's why they gave him a mustache.
Exactly. And speaking of him, he's great as the self-entitled prick. But when he first wakes up out of his stupor, his like kind of half lucid or half awake acting in that scene is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
It's what I've never been put under anesthesia, but having watched videos of kids coming, you know, you see all this shit after people get their wisdom teeth pulled. Man, he fucking nails it. And to me, that was impressive. A lot of people overdo the drunk or the, you know, anesthetized acting. That and his just perfectly mannered dickhead sell this movie for me. Him alone. And Michael Parks, like I said, I enjoy much more in this than Red State. He's great too. But man, he's in that, just in the getting directions from the yoga hoser girls, that, you know, snapping at them, all those little things that narcissistic dickheads do. It's to a T perfection. And he does the same fucking thing in Barbarian. He's the same guy.
He shows up in Yoga Hosers, playing a completely different character whose name is, and I shit you not, Yogi Bear. which it comes back throughout the movie that there's a whole gag connected to that, but that's very much more the kind of character I expect him to play. And it's more of like a character actor's character of like a clearly effeminate yoga instructor in a strip mall in Manitoba. It's a funny character that I expect Justin Long to play. This is not the kind of character I expect him to play. This is so atypical, but he plays it better than people that play this character all the time play it. Like, and that's probably because, again, like, I always feel like people that are super nice could also just turn on a dime like that and become these like massive pricks. And he just, and again, Genesis Rodriguez hints at as much in the movie that at one point he was this like very kind of like down to earth, very humble guy. And now he's this like complete conceited. He's full of himself. Get it? Like a walrus. He's big. He's full of himself. I
want to say though, that this is not even beyond this and Barbarian. And I'm looking to see if I can find an example of this where he does play this character again.
He's one of the best parts of Idiocracy. I just always think of him like as the best parts of the things that he's in, but he's never the lead. Like unless but when he is the lead, he's amazing because it's a movie we'll probably never talk about, unfortunately. But you and I bring it up anytime we bring up Mr. Justin Long, which is fucking Jeepers Creepers. Like that's Jeepers Creepers is one.
Isn't he kind of an asshole in that though too?
Yeah, but he's like an asshole in like a lovable sibling way. Because remember, it's like siblings going back and forth in that movie. We'll never talk about that movie, not because it's a bad movie, but because we don't want people to think that we're supporting child pedophiles, I guess. Yeah. Jesus Christ. That movie's amazing, though. Like,
I don't like Drag Me to Hell. I've seen it a couple of times. I think he's maybe more sympathetic in that. But he has that, you can see it. He has that ability to turn kind of that goofy charm onto its dark side.
Right.
And like I keep saying, this and Barbarian, it's amazing. It actually kind of scares me a little bit to think, okay, well, maybe he is really an asshole and this isn't a stretch for him to do these kind of parts because he does it really well. Very, very well. I hope it's just because he's a good actor. I
don't know. I think from everything I've seen, Justin Long is I think he's a good guy. I hope. He's like Sam Rockwell. It's like, I hope that you're a nice guy because like I really like you. And like, you know what? That's the buddy cop movie. That somebody make that Justin Long and Sam Rockwell. That would be like endearing, the buddy cop movie. Like the two of them as partners.
Oh yeah, that's God. A whole lot of weird energy right there.
I'm there for it. I'm there for it. I do want to point out the kind of other thing that I feel like, I don't know, gets unfairly leveled against this movie is, I think at the time it was a weird looking horror movie. And now if you say what this movie is to people, their response is what? I like that this is an A24 movie. But at the time, like people were not on board with the look of this movie. And like now, like this movie, like if you say to someone, this is an A24 movie, they like, I said it to someone yesterday, they're like, no fucking way. I was like, no, yes. Like first 10 A24 movies. Like the look of the movie is A24. It is in that wheelhouse of like the weird muted colors. Like it's there.
I was pleasantly surprised at how much better this looked than Red State. You can really tell was shot digital.
Yeah.
On one of those red digital cameras. And parts of this were too. And I think even the Airflex camera they used was digital. But man, it looks like film and it looks so much. This looks like a real movie to me compared to Red State. Red State looks digital, completely digital.
I think it kind of works for Red State though, because if it
could have that
docudrama.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
I think if it had leaned on it more, it would have been better.
It bugged me at first because I remember those times when those movies were coming out on this and it just wasn't quite right. And maybe they weren't fiddling with it and adding grain or whatever bullshit they do now. But I quickly got into it because this actually fits the story we're telling here, where you see this you've seen this on the news. You've seen Waco, you've seen Ruby Ridge in a digital format like this already. So yeah, it does. It lends itself to that story. I don't think it was done on purpose that way necessarily. Maybe it was, but I was like, oh, is this going to look like crap too? I don't remember it looking bad, but I saw it in the theater. So it was projected on a screen and was pleasantly surprised at how good it looked.
It's a really nice looking movie. It's really well shot. There are a couple really interesting focus pulls. There's also that one shot when they break into the house and it kind of pulls back from Haley Joel Osment. And then there's some interesting stuff done in this movie. Again, like not what you would expect from Kevin Smith. Also, the soundtrack is interesting. I mean, look, they mentioned what the gag is going to be at the end of the movie in the podcast. And they follow through. I'll give them credit where credit is due. They play the goddamn Fleetwood Mac song. They play Tusk right when they're fighting. And you know what?
Well,
it works. It actually totally works.
Because of that music. And I couldn't remember. I'm like, okay, did they use the song in this? And then as he's driving up to the house, it's in the score. The beat of the Fleetwood Mac song. It's not the Fleetwood Mac song, but the score is definitely mimicking the Fleetwood Mac song as he's pulling up to, what was it, Pippi Hill?
Pippi Hill.
And I'm like, oh, okay, they're probably going to use it at some point. If not in the end credits, they're going to use Tusk. And it makes sense because of the rhythm of that song. It's like a tribal drum beat, and it feels like a fight song in a way, like a school fight song.
Right.
So yeah, I think it works perfectly.
How do you feel about the How do you feel about the climax of this movie, though? The Michael Parks versus Justin Long in walrus suits. I do want to mention, you didn't mention this. I have to give props where props are due to Justin Long for sitting in that walrus suit for as long as he did. Because it might not look good. It might not. And let me rephrase it. It's not a matter of looking good. It doesn't film well. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. That is a good way to say it.
It doesn't film well, but that doesn't change the fact that there is a man in that goddamn suit, and he is an actor who does not want to have to be in that suit any longer than he probably wanted to be, frankly, because that thing could not have been comfortable. But I think in spite of kind of how restrictive the suit seemed, I still think Justin Long pulls a hell of a performance out of it, essentially all through his eyes and grunting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for some reason it went over my head. I'm like, wait a minute, he didn't remove his vocal cords. How is he still making sounds? Or he obviously didn't remove his vocal cords because he's making sounds. And then it took Guy Lapointe explaining when they discovered that one body that he doesn't have a tongue. And I'm like, oh yeah, duh. I should have.
The world's worst expository character is Guy Lapointe. That's what we all just. No character needs to be as obnoxious delivering expository dialogue as Guy Lapointe is in this movie.
I mean, I guess if you're going to have an exposition dump, it should be interesting. So I can't fault him for that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah. That's fair.
It's pretty. I mean, I chuckled during that scene. It just feels odd with what we've just pulled out of.
I like the way he says Howard. He just like says it like 4 or 5 times, and it's like such a weird. I don't know, like.
Well, he slips in and out of that accent just like a.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say the rest of my metaphor.
Johnny Depp is a class act, right? Like as an actor, like as weird as the character is, I don't think anybody else could have pulled it off as kind of bizarrely as he does. I'm not saying it works, but he is uniquely qualified to portray a weird fucking character, because I think that's in a lot of ways, that's been his MO from day one, is
right.
Just doing whatever he wants. So, but I like the end of the movie. I think it works as kind of like wild and zany as it is the two of them fighting. I do like that the way he gets the upper hand is proper brutal and gross and over the top, but still hewing to like, this is a horror movie.
I'm glad. And that was the one thing I couldn't remember. I'm like, okay, I know he survives. And, well, those happy endings, it's not a happy ending, but I don't want him to die because of this guy, because he doesn't, as much of a prick as he is, nobody deserves to die like this in Canada of all places.
Right.
But I didn't remember the fight thing at all. And so I was happy that he took him out with a tusk through the foot. I thought that was a nice little bit of, what do you call it? Yeah.
Serendipity.
Yeah. Something to that effect.
A little narrative, narrative call and response.
Yeah. And that's when he goes full walrus. So that's his ultimate demise too, is because now he has made that switch, which he was being primed for. So,
right.
So Howard Howe, or whatever the hell his real name is, succeeded in that much, at least.
Yeah, Benjamin Moussier. Just and the subtitles for this movie are great when they say Moussier. It's like Mooseeay. It's like, this is not even a real name. They're saying it so comically, obviously, to call out for Scott Mosier. But
the detective that they go to with his
fucking Ralph Garman.
The Canadianisms of this movie are pretty funny, and it is played for laughs, and that guy particularly does a really good job of exaggerating the accent and whatnot. It's
always weird to see Harley Morenstein and stuff. He plays the Border Patrol agent. Do you know what he's from?
Mm-mm.
He's from a YouTube series called Epic Mealtime, where they would make like over the top food with fast food. So they would go and like buy Big Macs and then like take the Big Macs and like make a lasagna out of them by like, and like this was like a whole.
Oh, so they started that whole TikTok bullshit thing happens these days?
This was long before
I understand that, but that has morphed into this hideous thing that these white women do in their stately, kitchens. I'm going to make Big Mac lasagna. And they put a bunch of fucking Big Macs in a casserole dish and pour a bunch of heinous shit on it and then bake it and act like they actually eat it. And it's just a fucking horrendous waste of food.
Okay, fair. But these dudes did eat it. Like they made like a point at the end of the video. Like, okay, their videos had very like early 10s masculine like dude bro energy, so they would like make the food and then the final shot of the episode would be all of them sitting down and like eating it together. Often it was like they were making like large quantities of things too, but they did always eat it at the end. But he's like a weird like pop culture artifact of a time that like has long passed, because like you said, now it's like these weird I thought you were going to say the women that are like dumping the pasta on the countertop.
Well, it is it's
but
the
no,
same
like
thing.
this isn't like that. This was like them actually cooking food, not like putting food in a toilet and saying like, oh, you're going to eat a snow cone out of a toilet. Like,
no, but that's what these women do too. They make,
I know
it's all wrapped up into the same nonsense.
This was like real food that they were cooking. But again, it was like exaggerated portions and shit, whatever. But it's weird because he's in this and he's in Yoga Hosers. But like, I was curious if you had any idea who he was, and you don't. And that's really funny because like, they make kind of a point of having him and Justin Long have an interaction like he's supposed to be somebody.
Right. Yeah. It's a funny little bit. It kind of sets up the tone of, or the idea where that he's nice and effusive, but then it sort of switches and he's not sure if he's fucking with him. Justin Long's not sure if the guy's fucking with him or not. And it sets up this tension that is going to, lead us to the Michael Parks encounter where, oh, he's got these great stories. Oh shit, I feel like I've been drugged. Oh wait, for me, it works in that way, not so much as, because I'm not going to know really anybody from Kevin Smith's universe that's in this movie, or like the detective, or the if I hadn't read the IMDb trivia while I was watching the Scott Mosier connection with the name that they're using, and all these other people.
I didn't realize that until you said that.
His wife being the waitress in the Slider restaurant.
But she's in like everything. She's in like every single one. She's in Clerks 2 playing like a main character. Like
she's in Red State, from what I understand. So all these connections to his world, even just his podcast or production team or friend. I'm surprised Jason Mewes isn't in this. He probably provides the voice for something, some voiceover or whatever.
He's in Yoga Hosers, and his cameo in Yoga Hosers has to do with Tusk. He's like a fan of Guy Lapointe's book, and he's like, "Your book is my Bible," and it's just Jason Mewes,
right?
Like, yeah. So yeah, I was surprised he's not in this. This is like, again, similarly to Red State, it's a very un-Kevin Smith movie. It doesn't wear its Kevin Smithiness on its sleeves. I mean, I guess it does more so than Red State.
Yeah, it does so more than Red State, and that's
it's
mainly
goofier.
Because,
like,
right. Its incarnation was a part of his podcast. Well, when do we get a chance to do that? We could talk.
Fuck, man.
Find some idiotic story about wanting a guy to live in your house in a walrus suit and turn it into walrus yes or walrus no.
I know, it's, oh my God. What though? Like, what's funny is this happened in 2014, like, and we're in the heyday of podcasting now. This like felt like
I mentioned to you when I went to see the movie, I was Michael Parks' character. I'm like, what the fuck is a podcast?
I was, like I said, 8 podcasts into doing this. So I was just that. I wouldn't even say in 2014, in December of that year, I would even consider myself a podcaster. Like 8 episodes does not make you anything other than some dude with a microphone on the internet. So
yeah, no, I really didn't fully comprehend. And I believe my wife was already listening to quite a few podcasts. I just didn't. It was something that I was not in tune with at the time. I'm like, wait a minute, what? It's like a radio show, but it's on the internet? How the fuck does that work? Where do you listen to it? Why do you listen to it? I became a certain age, and as a white cishet male, I was assigned my podcast. So because I need a platform.
Well, and you live in California too.
Because otherwise, my the group that I am in doesn't have a voice in this world.
I was gonna say your genuine, unique, and individual opinion will not be heard. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, because I'm underrepresented.
Isn't you and Kevin Smith are the same generation,
joking.
Right?
I think we're pretty close in age to each other.
Yeah, Kevin Smith is for you. He's 52, man.
Oh shit, I'm older than him.
Look, you know what though? Ultimately,
oh my god,
like
half a year younger.
Okay, but
he's half a year younger.
Ultimately, like for me, and this is gonna, I don't know. I think it's funny that this movie has the reception that it has, and I get it. But I think this movie, if played for people now, I think people would really resonate with this movie. And I think that's because horror is in a different place than it was in 2014. I think in a lot of ways you would probably agree. Like if this movie were coming out on Shudder like in a week, people would be like excited for something like this. Like a movie where a guy is in a walrus suit, and it's directed by Kevin Smith and Johnny Depp is in it. Like this movie right now would be fucking crazy. People would be really interested. Like horror TikTok would be all over this. Like that's the thing that's crazy about this movie is this movie has I feel like it should have a longevity that nobody talks about. And that's odd because so much of what this movie is doing is so popular now, including but not limited to it's a fucking A24 movie. Guess who just won an Oscar for Best Picture? It wasn't A24 or anything. Oh wait, it was. Like A24 right now are the movie studio folks in Hollywood, and not just for actual quote serious movies, but also for a long time they've been a horror movie place. Ari Aster's stuff, this movie, The Witch, so much stuff has been on A24, and this movie it deserves to be part of that conversation. I mean, I get that it's a silly, goofy, fucking weird ass movie that's tone is all over the place, but I do think you would agree with me. This movie would definitely find an audience in 2023.
Well, it strikes that chord as we were talking and have talked before about, this crazy movie just hit TIFF or whatever other South by Southwest. Oh, you guys are going to freak out when you see this. And I see that constantly now on Twitter. And then Barbarian is a good example of that. Like, this is fucking insane. Sometimes they meet that expectations. Most of the time they don't. This would probably get a conversation like that these days. I don't know what the conversation was because I wasn't on Twitter in 2014, but yeah, these things get pretty hyped up when they play festivals, and I could see this being like, oh, you won't believe what happens to Justin Long in this. Oh, just wait until you see what happened. Oh, just wait. Oh, you guys haven't seen anything like this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah.
Right. It feels like it.
I don't know if the consensus, because I see that stuff, and then a couple weeks later, the naysayers start to come out. I see all this positive praise for stuff like Barbarian. I'm just going to keep using Barbarian as an example. And I go, I'm going to check this out when it's available. And then a little while later, after all the praise seems to die away, then the naysayers, I think, feel more comfortable going, yeah, I didn't care for Barbarian. What are what was the hype about this? It's not that crazy. It's just frustrating or whatever, whatever the negative reviews are. So it may have had playing a festival and getting all this, not even praise, but just like, oh, you won't believe this, blah, blah, blah. And then a month later, it would have been like, what were you guys talking about with this Tusk movie? Didn't make any sense, or the suit was ridiculous, or whatever. So would it have a higher Rotten Tomatoes score now than it did then? Who knows? Not that's the
Yeah, I think it would. I think it would be more. I think it would find an audience more more regularly. I think an audience would resonate with this movie. I don't think an audience in 2014 was particularly ready for something like this. Something so kind of strange. Like, look at something like Men. Like, that movie is strange, and in a way that this movie can't even really comprehend. Like, this movie doesn't have a guy being birthed out of another dude's dick. Like, I mean,
pretty divided movie though too. So there's a lot of people that do not like Men.
Well, yeah, yeah, I don't blame them.
My daughter is one of them.
But at the same time, like, there's the same sentiment towards this movie. Like, I don't know anyone that's like, it's fine. Tusk is fine. Like, I don't know anybody who feels that way. It's either I liked it or fuck this movie. Like, It's like, for whatever reason, this movie strikes some people as like an affront. Like, your daughter refused to watch this with you.
Yeah. I think she would be surprised that it's less bizarre than Barbarian, to keep using that as an example, because Justin Long's in that and plays the same basic character, and that goes all kinds of crazy. And a sort of ridiculous kind of crazy like this. And is sort of disgusting in parts. And this doesn't really get all that disgusting.
It's kind of tame. Like I said at the opening of this episode, like, it's a body horror movie, but it kind of never really, like, it doesn't dive real deep into the construction of I think, again, that was what I was thinking was going to happen. We're going to see this really put together. It's like, all of a sudden, there it is. There's the creature. Like I said, this movie feels like there's some things missing, like not missing, but like left to our imagination. Like, was Michael Parks doing more with Justin Long's walrus character? Because it wasn't just a day. Like, it was like a couple of days. Like, they were looking for him for a little bit. Like, what was going on? What, like, again, like, things were just how long, and things like that are just left to us as the audience. Like, I like that. It helps with the movie, but yeah, at the same time, like, this is, like, in a lot of ways, this is not the same movie I remember either. Like, this is it's a slower movie, but then there's literally a point where the movie just goes, we're there now. And it's like, whoa. It feels like there's 20 minutes of this movie missing where we get to see a protracted torture of Justin Long. And again, you mentioned it pretty succinctly. The reason we don't see that is because that's not this movie. That's Human Centipede. Like,
that's the darker tone that, with a different ending, like, I imagine that's that movie.
Right.
Which probably would have been too much for most people.
Well, and again, is that the movie Kevin Smith is interested in making? Like, I don't know if his sensibilities hew far.
Yeah, from the reading of that podcast episode, I would say no.
Right.
It's the ridiculous jokiness of it that I think hit him more. Yeah, he went dark in the Justin Long Michael Parks duels.
He can pull that off because he's really good at writing dialogue as it is. Like, he is similar to Tarantino in his ability to write really interesting dialogue between characters. Say what you will about Tarantino, everything else, he knows how to write. Like, dialogue between characters, just like Kevin Smith does. Everything else is what it is, but those scenes are great, but that's because Kevin Smith knows how to write characters talking. I'm surprised, I will always be surprised how nice this movie looks from a horror movie being shot in 2014. That's an A24 movie that looks like it could exist now. How nice, like, how well put together this movie looks. That's shocking because it's Kevin Smith, and also that he nails the horror tone, because, like you said, some of this shouldn't be surprising that it works, but the horror stuff kind of is surprising that it does work, because this is a horror movie in the way that Red State was trying to be, or maybe even masquerading as, one might say. I think this is much more of a horror movie, period.
Oh, yeah. I would say even it's an old dark house even. I mean,
right.
It plays in some of the old tropes and the concept. Yeah, him saying that his next horror film in reference to Red State was going to be a straight horror movie, I find odd. This, I could see him saying, okay, yes, my next movie actually is the real straight horror movie.
Yeah. All Yoga Hosers is, I'll be dead serious with you, is the closest Kevin Smith has ever gotten to making Evil Dead. That's all it is. It's Evil Dead in a convenience store. Like,
maybe I'll watch it now.
I mean, it's not terrible. It's not great. I see why the critics didn't like it. There are things about it. There are anachronisms about it that make it a little cringy, but ultimately there are parts of it that work. And I think Tusk is the one out of the three that works the best. I think that this works better than Red State. I still like this more than Red State. I think that I love Kevin Smith. I really do. And I love the other things. I love Mallrats and I love Clerks, but I think this might be my favorite Kevin Smith thing. Like, it's just so weird and it works in a weird enough way that I can never kind of get it out of my mind. I don't know. Like, it's a weird movie. And the whole, like, is man a walrus at heart? Like, nobody's asking that, but I guess someone is. And here's the answer. And
the only person to ever ask that was Howard Howe.
Yeah. And we kind of mentioned it on the Red State podcast, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention it here. This may be getting a sequel.
Now, is that Moose Jaws or whatever, or is this a separate thing? Did that Cananadia trilogy get dumped after this?
So supposedly Moose Jaws is still happening and it's the one that's in production now. But according to Kevin Smith himself and Justin Long last year, towards the end of the year, Kevin Smith is drumming up interest to see if anybody's interested in coming back for Tusks with a $sign at the end. The way James Cameron wanted to put a $sign at the end of Aliens. And I guess the kind of hint that Kevin Smith has given as to what the possible direction for the sequel would be is, and this is interesting because this is, I kind of wanted to bring this up because it kind of answers something that you were talking about. And I think it kind of rectifies a problem with the end of this movie. It would have Wallace out of the suit, but insane to the point of wanting to put other people in the same predicament he was in for some unknown reason that you could, I'm sure, concoct as talented a screenwriter as Kevin Smith. But like, I could see that. Like, that would totally work. Like, you know, the story comes full circle in a way, right? He meets the guy in the wheelchair who's insane. He becomes the man in the wheelchair who is insane. And you know what, Justin Long? I mean, I'm never going to say no to seeing more Justin Long. Like, you'll be goddamned if I'll say, no, I don't want to see that movie, because I'll take that in a heartbeat. Because that's Justin Long in a leading role or in a Michael Parks-esque role in a Kevin Smith movie. And he's already shown that he kind of gets how to do this. If he could just refine it a little bit more and nail the tone, I think, a little bit more consistently, it might be actually something more people would come around on.
So he'll have to be like a Stephen Hawking-esque character in a wheelchair with a computer voice or something if he's to come back.
like Mason Verger.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Mason Verger
moving the straw on his thing to direct his scalpels to cut people up, and
or he has a Confederate or something, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Like, look, whatever direction that is could be interesting, and it would be also, again, like, it would allow Justin Long to really stretch his legs of being a shithead character, because then he's just a full villain.
Intended.
Yeah, then he's just a full-on villain, like, and I'm interested in that. So if that's happening, awesome. I'll watch whatever horror movie Kevin Smith makes, honestly. Like, it's kind of weird that Kevin Smith makes horror movies, but
I mean, that doesn't surprise me too much.
Let me put it this way. If I told you the guy who made Clerks is making a horror movie before you saw it's
knowing him as little as I do, I don't think he seems like a horror movie fan to me, I guess is all I can really say about that.
Interesting.
Like, that's the only reason it makes sense to me, is he seems like he would be a horror movie fan.
Well,
I'm trying to think if he's on those Eli Roth history of horror shows or not. I don't know if I know Quentin Tarantino is.
Boy, howdy, I like horror. I've never made a horror movie, though.
If there aren't two people in the world who like to hear themselves talk more than those two knuckleheads, I don't know who they could possibly be.
But you think Tarantino would ever make a horror movie? I guess he's not. I guess he's done. He's making one more movie and then he's done.
I know he's teased at every genre, but I think he'd probably make a good one, to be honest with you. I know a lot of his quote unquote favorite horror movies, and there's some top shit in there. Top notch. He has good taste, for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised by some of the movies he doesn't like more than I'm surprised when I hear of a movie that he does like.
Kevin Smith wanted to get Tarantino to play the Guy Lapointe role in this film, which I feel like would have been a bigger misstep than Johnny Depp, because as we all know, Quentin Tarantino's acting stylings are his best role is the pastor, the blind pastor in Little Nicky. That's about as far as I'll give Quentin Tarantino credit for acting, because he's atrocious.
Yeah, he's really bad in Pulp Fiction. Every time those scenes come on, I'm just like, oh man.
I mean, he's really bad in Django Unchained, doing an Australian accent. Yeah. Are you out of your fucking mind?
Looking more and more like Richard Kiel every year.
Oh my God. Wait, Richard Kiel or Richard Kind?
Richard Kiel.
Wait, Quentin Tarantino?
Jaws.
Quentin Tarantino
yes, every year. He's like, do you have the same?
He also could look like Richard Kind.
He kind of does, yeah.
That's why I was like, did you say Richard Kind?
No, I meant Richard Kiel.
Either way. Yeah, I think Tarantino would have been an even bigger distraction if he had been the Guy Lapointe character. And boy, but I would have paid to hear a French-Canadian accent out of him, though.
I think if the makeup had been even more obscurative, if that's a word.
Sure.
If it was really hard to tell who it was, and you're going, who the fuck is that? Not that you should be so distracted that that's all you're thinking while he's talking. Who the fuck is that? But it's obviously a guy in a rubber mask.
Yeah.
So
there's a scene in Yoga Hosers. There's a scene in Yoga Hosers where they show close-ups of him, and his moles and warts change in every single shot.
Like on SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah, like every single time it changes. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Again, like
that's how you do it.
Sometimes it feels like this movie just is one draft away from getting it. It's like you almost got it. You almost got it.
I'll say, this is it for me. This is, you mentioned, you like a lot of his other films, and I have a very narrow knowledge of his movies, but this would have to be my favorite just by default. I'm not going back and watching Clerks. I'm not going back and watching Mallrats, Chasing Amy, any of those. Probably won't watch Red State again, although I wouldn't be against it. But this is the movie, even though this is only the second time I watch it, that I can imagine myself seeing again. So by default, it has to be my favorite Kevin Smith film.
So any other final thoughts on Tusk, Mr. Bagley?
I enjoyed it more this second time. I think not having expectations or imagining the path that it was going to take helped. I didn't remember everything, but I remembered enough of it to not be so surprised. I just think that they didn't nail the landing. I like my idea better. I really do.
I'm kind of with you. I went back and listened to the first time I did an episode on this in 2014, and my opinion has changed a little bit, and thank God my criticism has gotten better, because boy, 9 years ago is a long time, folks, for fuck's sake. But the thing that kind of still trips me up about this movie is the thing that you've kind of mentioned multiple times, that it's a movie that feels very much at odds with itself, because it doesn't know what it wants to be. And then it doubles down on something that it shouldn't. And in spite of it, it doesn't completely derail the movie. And there are plenty of other movies out there where the entire movie falls apart the moment something like this happens. And thankfully, this movie is not one of them. But it's not. It kind of still makes the movie lesser than it could have been. And my hope in a lot of ways is if there is a follow-up to this in any form or fashion that isn't just Yoga Hosers, which is a complete beast of its own, that it is more akin to what this movie wanted to be and less what this movie was trying to be. Because this movie felt like it was trying to be one thing, but wanted so badly to be something else. And I think now in 2023, it can be that thing it wanted to be. This kind of weird horror movie that has these weird little comedic bits that kind of stick out, but I don't think they need to stick out as far now, because I think the time has changed, and I think the tones and expectations of horror movie audiences have changed. Even horror movie fans are a lot more accepting of weirder things in their movies now than they were 9 years ago. So speaking of horror movies, Mark, where can people find you hanging up your shingle talking about horror movies?
Well, you can find me at wakeupheavy.com. My show is Wake Up Heavy Recollections of Horror, which should be available wherever you listen to podcasts, brought to you by the folks at weirdingwaymedia.com. And you can find my show Cambridge and with Sean there as well. Totally different topics than horror movies, although movies do come up as something that my friend and I obsessed over as kids. And you can find Chris and I at From the Files of Police Squad in color with the maestro Mike White. That show is bingeable now, I like to say, because all the episodes are out and available on weirdandwaymedia.com. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd, at Wake Up Heavy is my handle on all social media. How about you, Mr. Big Round Balls? Keep that going.
Mr. Big Round Balls.
The car, Mr. Big Round Balls.
weirdingwaymedia.com. Like Mark mentioned, that's where you can find me and all the things that I work on, which are many in number.
Many and varied.
Yeah, boy. But they're all podcasts, though. It's weird. As for Weirding Way Media, there are so many great shows you can check out over there, like Mark Begley's Wake Up Heavy, like Mike White's The Projection Booth, and like good old friend of the show, Father Malone's Dark Destinations, a narrative-based show where he goes to weird and scary destinations and, stirs up some trouble. You should go listen to those. Those are some great narrative shows. But if you're more interested in this show, culturecast.com, patreon.com/culturecast, all the ways you can help out monetarily, like, rate, and review the show wherever you get it, though, if you can't do the whole money, song, and dance. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. As always, it's fun.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe we can change the opinion about this movie yet. I don't know. People seem pretty goddamn dead set in their ways.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I see love for this movie out in my Twitterverse.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear it. So, until the next episode, we'll catch you on the next episode.